thought I was lucky, but I think following those speakers, my luck just ran out. So I want to thank the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, Atlantic Philanthropies, Chuck and Helga Feeney, Nancy Bechtel. What a glorious opportunity to talk about music and the brain. So let's see, okay. So my title is When Music, Art, and the Brain Collide. I thought of another title today. We have a visitor, Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, and she writes about human archaeology, and these are the artifacts and behaviors that come out of humans that tell us so much about who we are. And of course, as a neurologist, we think a lot about where in the brain that happens. So I'm going to take a very short period of time, less than 10 minutes, to give you my overview about what we've heard tonight. The first is this idea of a paradigm shift. I don't know music, but I know science, and I'm going to talk about this paradigm shift that Bill Seeley created in the setting of analyzing an artist. A word about why the arts are so important to science, particularly emphasizing that there are artists who see the science before we do. We must listen. I'm going to describe my experience with artists with degenerative diseases, which began in 1995 when I was at UCLA. And with Anne, suddenly we had an understanding about why this happened. And then a few words about Anne Adams and Ravel and why they're tied together. So first, when Bill wrote the paper about Anne Adams, it was really a paradigm shift. It was a paradigm shift in neurodegeneration. We never went back. We thought about areas before this study. We, after this study, thought about circuits. We learned that diseases begin in a very focal way and spread out along a network or a circuit in the brain. We learned from this paper that as one network declines, others may ramp up. Suddenly an explanation for the gorgeous art that we have witnessed in our patients in different stages of neurodegeneration. And then the final paradigm shift was that in progressive aphasia, once and for all, visual curiosity emerges and creativity occurs. Been challenged before. I think this was suddenly set in stone. What also happened, I think, is quite amazing in that this paradigm shift in neurodegenerative diseases, which I think will eventually lead to therapies, came out of the study of a strength, not a weakness. I think neurologists have focused for centuries on weakness, not strength. Suddenly, a strength gave insight into how the brain worked and eventually how to treat a disease. Been huge rejection of the idea that you can learn anything from a single case. And I think Bill, in the same way that a writer or a musician or a composer meticulously studied this single case, probed it until it gave us big insights, not little insights, but big insights in how the brain is organized. It was really, as it unrolled, science like a detective novel, and that's what science is like when it's at its best. And most amazingly, we had a scientist studying an artist who was studying a musician. So we had this amazing parallel, and we inserted a scientist into this interplay between Ravel and Anne Adams. So couldn't emphasize how important it was to think about music and the brain, to really begin to understand the illnesses that we study. But I have to say that never in our society have the arts and scientists been farther away from science itself. And here's one of my favorite writers, I think a visionary, Doris Lessing. And we know that there is diminished support across our country for art, music, theater. Music classes are gone from grade schools. Art classes are no longer there. And only the very privileged often get an opportunity to change their brains with musical experience. Anyone who saw Boon Lee's picture of a musician's brain with bigger structure and motor regions and planning regions in the brain realizes that music is at the core of what we can do and what we can accomplish, and finishing our beautiful blueprints, as I'll come back to, Doris Lessing talks about. So what she says, and this is very true, I'm afraid, what society doesn't realize is that in the past, ordinary people respected books, and they don't now, or at least not very much, and the whole respect for serious literature and learning has disappeared. Some people get it, and this is, I think, very much a GBHI, Chris Exley idea that science and art belong together. The difference, and this is astronaut Mae Jemison, a physician, almost a professional dancer. The difference between science and the arts is not only that they are different sides of the same coin, or even different parts of the same continuum, but rather they are manifestations of the same thing. The arts and scientists are avatars of human creativity. And think of the images that Boon Lee showed today, and Bill Seeley did, about how similar activation in parts of the brain in musicians and composers and creative artists and scientists is amazingly similar. There's another really interesting and important story, I think, that is really almost totally untold, and that is the realization that artists often lead scientists in the discoveries that scientists make. So I'm going to talk specifically about two people, Emily Dickinson, who our poet laureate Kay Ryan has called the first neuroscientist. And she really exquisitely understood the concepts of neurodegeneration in the brain in her poetry, more than 100 years before scientists like Stanley Prusner described it at a molecular level. Going to talk about Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who, before the semantic variant that Boon Lee described had ever been described, he had written about. And amazingly, at least 10 years before any scientists ever realized this entity exists. Doris Lessing has written brilliantly about climate change, the apocalypse that this might bring about, and also the added wisdom that long-lived creatures might bring to the world. I think, again, very much a GBHI idea. Jonah Lehrer has written in his book, Proust Was a Neuroscientist, a beautiful book, about the fact that Gertrude Stein understood, and she's hard to read, that language structure is inherent in our brains, and understood that structure and played with it in her writing before Chomsky did. And Virginia Woolf really captured our consciousness, our multiple consciousness, before Chris Koch at Caltech began to describe at a scientific level the different components of consciousness, but Virginia captured it beautifully. So here's Emily Dickinson. And she was writing about moral decay, but I think in this poem, she really captures the neurodegenerative process. And crumbling, or the degenerative process, is not an instant act. It doesn't happen instantly. In fact, now we know it takes 20 years. A fundamental pause, dilapidations, processes, or organized decays. This is an organized process, and we have to break that organization. 'Tis first a cobweb on the soul, that's a misfolded protein, a cuticle of dust, a bore in the axis, an elemental rust. Ruin, or this process, is devil's work, consecutive and slow, fail in an instant, no man did, slipping, or this degenerative process that we see suddenly in our offices, is Crash's law. So she understood this degenerative disease, and I think we scientists should have been listening to her when this poem came out. On a trip to Colombia, I decided I would reread 100 Years of Solitude around 1995. And come to page 49 in this book. Here's Gabriel Garcia Marquez describing exactly what we see in the semantic variant of primary progressive aphasia. He had writer's block at the time, and he was obsessed with the empty words that he was putting out onto a piece of paper. So he's writing about someone who develops this semantic problem. Again, decade before described in science. He had trouble remembering every object in the laboratory. He marked them with their respective names so that all he had to do was read the inscription in order to identify them. So he doesn't know what these things are, but writing it down helps a little bit. This is the cow. She must be milked every morning so that she will produce milk, and the milk must be boiled in order to be mixed, in reality, in coffee. They went on living in a reality that was slipping away, momentarily captured by words, but which would escape irremediably when they forgot the values of written letters. So at the same time, we were working with a gentleman, Bob. He had semantic variant PPA. This is from his autobiography, his notebook. Hard to see, but what he is doing is writing down all the names of people he knew, all of the objects in his world, the addresses, people that he loved. This is his attempt to capture this reality as it's slowly slipping away. Marquez saw semantic PPA in his mind conceptually before it was ever seen by scientists. This is Bob's drawings. His cow drawing is quite beautiful, so is his elephant. But when you ask him to draw these different animals, he is losing the meaning of what a dog is. A dog looks like it comes out of evolution. It looks exactly like the cat. The fish looks like a turtle. The bird looks like an insect. So this is the loss of concepts that occurs with semantic variant. So I first became interested in artists when I met Jack in 1995. And Jack had been a very wealthy man, a banker. He was no interest in art. His wife got sick and he started painting. And he repeated the same painting over and over again. There was an obsessiveness, a compulsiveness. And like Anne, he was particularly compulsive about what he wore. So purple shirt, yellow pants, purple shirt, this compulsion for these two colors. And his paintings often reflected this. Here's a picture of a parrot. He didn't know what a bird was, but his ability to visualize this and put it onto a canvas was remarkable. His sailboat is very interesting, and the sail is the sail and also the background. Later in his illness, he lost the ability to paint things realistically, but I think these very whimsical shapes and people in purple and yellow. So I was very enthusiastic about Jack. I had never thought about a strength in a patient with neurodegenerative disease, and was coming up for promotion, and I showed this to my mentors and chairs, and I showed them this work, and of course there were no theories for this, and this was, after all, a neurologist thinking about drawing. And so my mentor suggested that I submit this paper to Arizona Highway. So I didn't know much about Arizona Highway, so I actually found a copy of Arizona Highways, and this is what it looks like. And you know, in academia, this is not a prestigious journal. So anyways, it was not a compliment. But I'm stubborn, and I persisted, and about 6 months later, I saw a very poor gentleman who came from New Mexico, a native group there, and had painted his people as he remembered them when he was a child. And we have a series of these paintings that I'll say at the end of my talk are going to be more extensively studied in the next decade. So this is one of my latest patients. He's a welder. He gave me this. It was very moving for me. This is a welded bird or insect or possibly animal. But his concepts are diminished about what an animal is, but wow, does he get the creative process. And it's one of the favorite things I have. This was the last portrait I want to show you, and this is one of the patients that we saw, and he painted extensively. He never painted before he got sick with frontotemporal dementia, and he became obsessed with couples, even though his own relationships were very, very destroyed. But his couples were fascinating in that, one, he was fascinated by couples, and he lived isolated alone. But two, he captures his loneliness in a peculiar way in these couples who are attempting to be put together, but they're actually very, very far apart. This is another one here where he shows a couple, and I showed it to our world's expert on the face, Paul Ekman. Paul Ekman said, that doesn't really reflect any emotion. It's a mixture of emotions. He doesn't capture emotion, but that's what's so mysterious and interesting about these faces of couple that are grimacing together yet could not be more apart. As the disease progressed, the art disintegrated. As his brain was progressively disintegrating, he developed ALS. And his last pictures were those with lines painted on these animals. So how do I interpret this? I think brain asymmetry is the basis for enormous human creativity. Art is a unique window into the creative process, because we could see immediately what that brain is thinking about as something is produced. I think if you divorce the arts from science, the world loses. Doris Lessing said, we've got to believe in our beautiful impossible blueprints. Anne was born with a certain genetic blueprint, but this degenerative disease brought out a different part of that blueprint, and it was truly glorious. It made me take a step back and realize, as a neurologist, we're not thinking really about diseases, but we're really thinking about complex, wondrous people. And I think that's the story that I've learned from these artists, the story I've learned tonight, and the story I've learned from GBHI. So, thank you. So, for the last part of our program, we are really lucky. The orchestra of the San Francisco Conservatory of Music tonight will be led by Joseph Young. Maestro Young is now the new, as of April, conductor of the Berkeley Symphony, and he will also be the guest leader of the symphony here at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. So we're going to hear this, and I think we have lots of ideas for thought from this evening. Thank you.